Welcome to the Waiting List podcast. Tell us a story.
It's like many things you start building from scratch.
And then I'm like, wait, I really do like watches because
you've seen so many watches that makes you excited.
I think I really do like watches.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to see if you are a watch enthusiast.
Welcome everybody to the Waiting List podcast. You are tuning in with me, Alex, Daniel, and Lung Lung, and we're here with my good friend at Mark Cho on Instagram. And he is actually someone that's influenced me a lot on my sartorial journey. So I'm really excited. And also, this is a 2-part episode, so stay tuned for the second part too. So welcome, Mark.
Hey, how you doing?
Very good, thank you. And Mark is the co-founder of the Armoury, which I regard as the best place to go to, as I mentioned, in the sartorial world. So what I'd like to begin with, Mark, is how do you start all that?
It's quite a long story. So I have been interested in tailoring, a fan of tailoring for actually more than 20 years now. It started when I was in high school. I went to high school in the UK, and we didn't have to wear our school uniforms anymore once you turned 16. So you were allowed to wear a suit instead. And being the kind of nerdy guy I was, I felt like, I should go and look into this. So I started to research what sort of suits could I wear, what were suits. I asked my dad a bunch of stuff. This was very pre-internet, so I went to the library and got books out. And the more I looked into it, the more interesting I found it. It was like peeling an onion, and there was just layers and layers and layers. And, I am a person who actually quite likes rules, not because they limit you, but because they kind of give you a sense of where you should be going. And I just found the rules of tailoring very interesting, and oftentimes they made a lot of aesthetic sense. On top of that, the historical aspects of tailoring are really interesting too, right? British tailoring, its origins in military clothing, and even as I discovered later in my life, the history of different cities in Italy eventually all generating their own traditions of tailoring. It was all just super fascinating to me, and it was fascinating enough that I stuck with it from then till now, and it was interesting enough that I bothered to build a business around it as well. So that was the very early days, and then fast forward to, Armoury's been around for about 10 years, but actually probably about 12, maybe 13 years ago, I was, experimenting with a lot of tailors in Hong Kong because I was living in Shanghai at the time, and I would take my holiday breaks in Hong Kong. And I got to know the tailors at WW Chan really well. And, they were really wonderful people. They're really good to me. They taught me a lot. And we had a good relationship. And, one day they were like, we are thinking about doing a trunk show in London. Would you be interested in, giving us some advice on how to do something in London? And I said, yeah, of course. So I helped them arrange hotels and find some customers. And it got to a point where I was like, I'm really enjoying this. Would it be okay if I came with you as a salesperson? And they were like, yeah. So for a little while, I was the accompanying salesperson on Patrick Chu's trips to London. And I really enjoyed that. And they later asked me, we know you have a little bit of background in real estate, because my work used to be real estate. They had a little bit of background in real estate. We're thinking about trying to find a shop on Hong Kong side. Currently, our shop is in Hong Kong, is on Kowloon side. And so I said, yeah, no problem. So I went to Hong Kong side and I started poking around, and I found a few sites that I thought really made sense for them. And one of them was a site in the Pedder building on Pedder Street on the 3rd floor. And it was very, it was not a site most people would think about. That building was near derelict, or not derelict, but it was not a famous building. It didn't have famous tenants. It was not an art gallery building at that time. It was actually kind of famous for having a lot of factory outlet shops, and some were even busted for selling pirated goods. So it didn't have a great reputation. But I thought the location was amazing because it was directly above the MTR station. I thought that the bones of the space itself were beautiful. It was very high ceilings, a lot of natural light. And it was cheap, or I assumed it would be cheap because no one else wanted to be in that building. So I strongly suggested it to them. And then they thought about it for a while, but actually they passed on it. And so I said, okay, well, no problem.
I'll do it then, basically.
Well, actually then, I kind of left that project as it was and, continued on my work. And then certain things happened in my life, which kind of made me feel like I could do a career change. And I had also met Alan C., who's my co-founder for the Armoury. And we decided to try and make a go of that space. So we went back to that space, and we kind of put together this concept men's store called the Armoury. And actually, we asked WW Chan to kind of not share the space with us, but like we would be their agent on Hong Kong side. So that meant that customers could come to our shop in Hong Kong and place orders for WW Chan suits or arrange fittings or do pickups from our shop. And that went really well. And that's kind of how the Armoury actually got started, was that a lot of our initial customers were from WW Chan.
Yeah, I got the question, which was at the very beginning of your story here, you went and sought out all these kind of tailoring books. You actually sought out this information, right? As watch guys, you know, part of that journey when you start is quite solo. And I'm just thinking it must be even more solo for you in the tailoring. Like, how could you be able to share your passion with anybody at that time when you were like 16, or were you that
No,
into
I
it,
mean,
or?
for a 16-year-old to be into this is super precocious, right? To the point of probably being kind of annoying. So no, you can't really share it with anybody. But also it wouldn't even occur to you that this is something you shared, right? Like tailoring, especially among men, is just not something you used to talk about. Like you wouldn't reveal who was the tailor that you used to use,
What were you wearing when you were 16?
I was wearing, I think it was a Next suit. So Next was like a very cheap and cheerful British like clothing brand.
Yeah.
Mass retailer.
Yeah. And then I had some Next, and I had some like deep discount Hugo Boss.
Yeah.
And
Some Armani suits as well.
No, nothing like that though. That was about it. I mean, I was 16. I was wearing it to school, right?
Yeah. But on the weekends and stuff, were you always dressed like that?
No, on the weekends, because normally you have to wear a school uniform. So on the weekends, like it was just like every other kid, like jeans, t-shirts, polo shirts, that sort of stuff.
Okay.
So I want to go back because you mentioned about trunk shows, which I think formulates, your starting point with Patrick. Then it also forms part of the Armoury business now. So for our listeners who may not know, could you explain that part of the business to them?
Yeah, trunk shows are an important part of the business, and they are kind of an unusual way of doing kind of like a retail business, I suppose. So what a trunk show, where the root of the word trunk show came from is it used to be British tailors would pack all their stuff into trunks, get on a ship, float their way over to the US and unpack and take orders. And they would go on this tour through the US that would take a few months, collecting orders, and then take the ship back to the UK, make everything, then come back again. And hence it was trunk shows. And that system still exists. People will come somewhere, set up shop for a few days, collect their orders, and then go back. And the Armoury, what we do is we have trunk shows where we host craftsmen, suppliers, people that we like, and allow them to meet our customers. And we try to act as like more than a go-between. We curate it to a certain extent. So like the craftsmen we host are people we really believe in, are products that we think are really quite special. We do a lot of the logistics, so the import and export of these items, making sure they're transported safely, make sure they get to the customer's hands safely. We offer a lot of advice along the way, so trying to get the customer not just interested in the craftsman, but also able to understand why one craftsman might be better for them than another. We try to avoid superlatives where we can. Like if you're going to go with a tailor, you should go with it because it is something that matches you somehow. So like for instance, personally, there are certain tailors in the Armoury's roster that I actually don't really use. It just doesn't really suit my personality. But that doesn't mean it's not right for someone else.
Great point there. Understood that one. Because, I want to go back more to the Armoury because like typically Hong Kong is famous for affordable pricing. Which to me, sometimes I question because the rent is so expensive. So it doesn't really add up in terms of part of the cost. But anyway, in regards to your store, how did you think about bringing such, the absolute finest around the world? Because you do host like Liverano, Musella Dembeck, Orazio Luciano, and selling them considerably more than the local tailor. Because you mentioned WW Chan, but that was just one of the highest in Hong Kong anyway.
It's an interesting question. There's actually quite a few parts to that. So we didn't think that much about price. Like we thought about it from the perspective of me and Alan at the time were like late 20s. What is the sort of money we'd spend on a suit? Maybe like 10 to 20K, right? And 20K would be like pushing it. And then we sort of knew there were more expensive things out there like Keaton, and those would be like 30, 40K, and like British Bespoke would be like 40K. But I remember at the time, the most expensive jacket we had was 23 or 24K. and we were like, oh my God, are we ever going to sell this? This is an absurd amount of money. Turns out it's not that absurd, actually, for various reasons I'll go into in a second. But we also didn't really think much about like, how do we line up against Hong Kong tailors? I guess because we just didn't see what we were doing as the same as Hong Kong tailors. Like, Hong Kong tailors provide, like, in many cases, they provide just a serviceable suit. Like, technically it's fine, it fits fine, it'll be well made, but it's not particularly sexy or exciting or anything like that. I think tailors in Hong Kong, there are some tailors in Hong Kong who really set themselves apart. Like, they really like go to a new level. People like W.W. Chan, for instance. And this is something I wanted to get into a little bit. The problem with the Hong Kong tailoring industry, and unfortunately the problem with many kind of older industries in Hong Kong, is that Hong Kong traded on a reputation of cheap, fast, and good enough for a long, long time, maybe too long. And as a result, they never really priced in the next generation. They never priced in, and I mean this all, not just financially, but in an abstract sense, like, what does it take to make your business interesting, sexy, attractive, prestigious enough for a new generation of people to come and enter it, you know? And if you are just gonna kind of like keep the boat afloat with like cheap and cheerful, it's probably not enough, you know? And that's what we've seen now. It's like, why are there no new tailors in Hong Kong? Well, I mean, I think if you were from a typical Hong Kong household and you told your parents you want to be a tailor, I don't think that would get a great response, you know? Whereas, like, I think even in, say, the UK and Italy, like, that attitude has changed a lot. Similarly in Japan as well. Like, just people have different attitudes towards craft now. Like, people can see that it's difficult and challenging and potentially financially very rewarding, as well as like just as a task for you to do, as a job for you to do, very rewarding as well.
So do you mean like the branding side? Or so you're basically just a manufacturing clothing kind of traditional Hong Kong kind of thing, like cheap and cheerful, without actually investing in, let's say, the lifestyle aspect of what you actually use the suit for and these little subtleties?
It's the branding side, yes, but it's a little bit more than that. Like, they never invested in they never really invested in the taste either. As in, like, they never really explored what could be done in tailoring, tried to like go toe to toe with like more famous and prestigious Western tailoring houses, which I think is a shame, because in many ways, technically, like, Hong Kong tailoring is great. It's just they don't know how to make something that's really like, you look at it and you're like, oh, wow, that's really special. That's really well done. Especially when you're going to talk to someone who knows tailoring really well.
I want to ask, how does somebody get into tailoring? Like, where do you learn this stuff? And then when you're talking about second generations being able to take over the business, right? I kind of think it's like interior design. Like, you can study the theory and the measurements, like which color matches which color. But in order for you to have that kind of taste you're talking about, you have to travel, you have to see stuff, you have to be exposed to it, right? So when you're talking about tailors being good, would it be fair to say the best tailors would have been the guys who started wearing the stuff from a really young age, people who have been exposed to it?
It's a very good point, and actually it reminds me, I missed something on the previous point I made. When you're talking about the next generation, you need to price in how long it takes to train them, you know? And this is, for instance, why like London does struggle, probably more so than Italy, to get new young tailors, because it's very expensive to live in London. And, you know, an apprentice's salary in London is still significant, you know? So maybe the apprentice has like some financial support from his family, but it's even more difficult in Hong Kong, where like starting salaries are very, very low, you know, and families might not have the means to support an apprentice like that for a job that they don't really understand or appreciate. Regarding like experience, you are right. Like, taste, I think, is very much something that is developed over time. You know, the more you get to see, I think the better you will be able, like, the better your taste will be. Like, it reminds me of, I have one shoemaker who I work with who I think put it very well. His name's Yohei Fukuda. So Fukuda-san said, like he'll always comment to me when we're talking about different people's work or kind of our colleagues that we work with, that person has good eyes, or sometimes that person has bad eyes. And what he means by good eyes is just like when they look at something, like they know where proportions need to be, textures need to be, in order to be a little bit more special, like a little bit more eye-catching.
Yeah.
Sensitivities.
Yeah, they are aesthetically sensitive, and I think that sensitivity, it can be born with a little bit, but I think a lot of it is just experience.
I want to touch on something which I think is quite sensitive, because is it to do with maybe the culture in the education system? Because I would always generally regard as, Hong Kong or Chinese, we typically have this commonality of just following orders quite well. We don't think really outside the box. Whereas the Italians seem to have this sort of really relaxed lifestyle. So they just do anything. Like the Neapolitan style, they kind of reinvented themselves. You got Florence tailing, Milanese pocket hole. So you got all these sort of like creative ideas and flair. Is that because of the education system or maybe culture?
I think you're right. It is a culturally based thing. Hong Kong tailors, will typically just do whatever the customer tells them to do. When, if you are trying to do something good, actually you do need to push back a little bit and make some decisions. And I think when you are talking about like the upper echelons of a craft, of a good, right? Like you need to be careful. You need to put your foot down and just be like, I'm not going to do that. It looks stupid.
Well, I mean, I'm not really into suits, as everybody knows. I'm into more like street fashion stuff, right? But I have got a few things made.
Alex has something to say.
Yeah, Alex has probably said something. Chill out, Alex.
I'll leave it quiet.
But what I was going to say is that one of the things that puts me off is that when I go around Hong Kong, right, I see everybody in like basically white shirts and blue trousers or grey trousers or that, right? To me, it's incredibly boring. And also, I feel that it's not actually a great advertisement for like suits, because you're a worker. You're an employee in an office building. You work for a corporate, right? And you got these, like, to be honest, I think crappy shoes on. Yeah, and they're not even that comfortable to walk in. And I just think, well, I don't really want to look like that. I don't even want to be associated with that. However, with your stuff, I do see there's an individual flavor. But at the same time, I don't see many people like doing what you're doing. Do you feel like you would welcome more competition in order to, as an industry as a whole, move forward and actually people could develop their taste in tailoring?
Yeah, absolutely. And this goes back to Alex's earlier question too, which is like, what was it like to sell basically more expensive tailoring in Hong Kong? The good thing about Hong Kong is because so many people have tried bespoke tailoring in some form or other, cheaper or slightly more expensive, they actually are quite sophisticated. Like Hong Kong actually has a very sophisticated tailored clothing market, because so many people have tried it. So many people have actually had a lot of experience with it over the years. So especially when you're talking to like older people, like they understand what a full canvas chest is. They understand what shape in a jacket is. But I'm sorry, I forgot the rest of your question. I apologize.
No, I was just saying, like, would you welcome more competition?
Yes, you're right. So would I welcome more competition? Absolutely, because I got into this because I like tailoring enough that I just want to see it hang around for as long as possible. Like the tide is slowly receding, unfortunately, for tailoring. People are like, oh, well, it's too uncomfortable to wear. It doesn't look that good. And you're right. Like in many cases, when you do it badly, it is uncomfortable to wear and it doesn't look great. So we are trying our best to like buck the trend and make people understand that like it can look good, it can be comfortable, but you have to spend a little bit of time on it, just like you would spend a little bit of time on anything if you wanted to get a good result out of it.
I think another thing is that there needs a level of education. So like when it comes to summer months, right, you're talking like seersucker and linen and but I only like learn this kind of stuff. I mean, obviously I can see what linen is, right? But you don't realize the benefits of a linen suit, right, unless you actually wear one in the summer.
From a girl's perspective, what I'm confused about is, the tailor knows how to make the clothing, right? But is it his job to say, this is off, like this doesn't match this, you should wear this with this color? Because so far, all I see is a bunch of old men like making clothes, right? So what if your proportions are all off? Like who's telling the customer?
So there's a few, all these things tend to be multi-part answers.
Yeah.
Firstly, when I evaluate tailors, especially when we're thinking about working with them, there's always the are they good technically and are they good aesthetically? Because those two are two different things.
Yeah.
And you can have tailors that are good at one and not another. And it's very rare to get a tailor that has both. So, for instance, like there are many Hong Kong tailors who actually will fit a suit, like make a suit fit you in a technically accurate way. You know, it won't pull in a funny way. It'll sit properly at all the key points of the body, but it won't look good. You know, and there are other people, especially the Italians, in fact, who definitely bend the rules for what is acceptable in terms of how something should fit. Yet somehow the clothing is more sexy on them. It's more attractive, just more flattering on them.
There's actually a point that I want to bring up. It's actually you raised a few weeks ago, right, when we were actually talking about this tailoring. So I was going around with Alex, you know, Scott Chang, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then you also got kind of exposed to tailoring, and it's something you looked into, right?
Yeah.
Like to get it done for you.
Yeah. Like, why is there?
What's the barrier? Why not do it?
No, I think, like for me anyways, right? I think the best thing about, like, if you look at the 50s, right? Everyone, like, we're talking about women, right? Same kind of makeup, same hair, like waist is always cinched in. There's a body shape, right? And now everything's getting bigger and bigger. And then I'm just thinking, like, why is there nobody that has the template for girls? Like dresses, a very classic cut, and then we just go in and get it made. Because when I'm asking guys around me, like Alex and Dan, the tops I'm buying from, say, Lane Crawford, it costs more than them getting it made. So I'm not getting this. I don't get it. Yeah.
Could I also add, I'm not sure if this is true, but I heard and read on the article, was it because the ladies weren't in the corporate roles in history? So it's only recent times where they started taking more of a senior position. So in terms of the actual tailors able to make that suiting, is that because it's like limited skills or expertise?
Ladies tailoring arguably has a shorter history than men's tailoring. And I am not an expert, honestly. This is why we don't do it. Because at the end of the day, we're not experts. We never really developed the expertise. We're slowly starting to try it. But I think that even from our limited experience, like, it takes quite a different mindset. You know, and I think women are looking for something that, like, their expectations are quite different from men's. Not necessarily better or worse, but they're different.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I love how straight up you were there, you know, to say like, you know what, I'm not good at that, so I don't do it, you know. I think that's way more credible.
Well, I think dealing with female customers is always more tough, I think. I mean, like, you can't be too blunt if somebody comes out in a dress and you just want to be like, this makes you look fat, right? Like, you can't really just tell them like that. Yeah.
But I want to add more to the exposure thing, because you said it has to be on regards to the first trial. So I mentioned in my previous podcast where I was originally using Orazio Luciano, and I thought, okay, that would be my maximum budget. Then I tried off, actually, it was Alan's jacket. Then when I put it on, Sam asked me, what do you think? And I looked at it and I thought, yeah, perfection. Then I asked him, like, how much does it cost? Then when he said 60,000 Hong Kong, I didn't flinch because I expected that. So what I've discovered about your store in particular, which I want to touch on in regards to service, is the Armoury itself, the store. For our listeners who's never been, do take a trip in there, because it's kind of like a private members club and they welcome you like a family. So how did you create that work environment? Because it's very rare to find that in Hong Kong, and the way you've actually positioned it is very comfortable and it's not intimidating for someone to try one of those suits.
It is part of the initial design of the store. So I worked on the interior design of all the stores with my old middle school classmate. And from the get-go, we wanted to make the initial kind of design spec was that we wanted to make something that felt like a library that you could drink in. You know, we wanted a space that was quite peaceful, quite quiet, that you could hang around in for a long time. And there are a few reasons for this. One is that, like, suits need to be relevant. Like, if my overarching goal is to make sure tailoring hangs around for as long as possible, trying to make tailored clothing less accessible, more snooty, more stigmatized is not going to help that at all. Like, it needs to be welcoming. It needs to be relevant to people's lives. And this is why, for instance, like, we do a lot of soft tailoring, because people now find it much more comfortable. If anything, the gentlemen with us who shop with us, who are now going back to a slightly more structured tailoring, are people who are very experienced in tailoring, and they understand that there are certain things that you can only do with a structured garment rather than with a soft garment. The other thing is that, and this is just my general philosophy on stores and store design, you know, luxury retail is often like luxury retail is theater for sure, right? A lot of it, a customers' opinions, what they're going to buy, like those opinions have already been formed before they come to the store. Okay. Oh, yeah, luxury stores are about theater. Because of the advertising that you're exposed to, because of the celebrities that wear it, because of, just that low-level hum of social media that you're exposed to that's showing off these luxury pieces, like a lot of times your decision's already been made. So the people in the store are almost like vending machines. Like they're there to just fetch what you want, but they're not always there to like give you advice or guide you or really anything else. Like luxury stores are not really places to hang out in. They tend to be designed for you to come in, be really impressed, so much so that you're going to buy something and then you should leave because you don't feel very comfortable anymore.
So uncomfortable. Like
Yeah,
obviously
so
we're in the watch space.
Yeah.
If forget even going in, just when you're window browsing and you feel that someone's watching you window browse from inside the store, you already feel like you want to move away.
Yeah, it's true. Like it's a very different thing to impress somebody with kind of just the sheer force of your financial power versus like making them feel comfortable and at home and feel like they could belong in this place.
I thought when you said that, wanted to be a place where you could stay longer, is that if it hadn't worked, it could have just been quite easily a whiskey bar for you. Yeah. To drown your sorrows.
Yeah.
Well, I want to touch upon in regards to service, because I mentioned to Daniel, like how did you first meet Mark? Because you knew about it.
Actually, I met him first in the store.
Okay.
So actually, I went in there, I heard about the Armoury, and I actually think that the name is really cool.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, like the way it kind of plays on a guy's mind. Yeah, when they wear a suit. Yeah, I do think it's like that. I just thought it was much better than, I don't have an affiliation with W. Chan, but it doesn't really mean anything, right? Or Ascot Chan. I just like the Armoury, right? And also, it gives you that flexibility as well under this name. So I went in there and with a friend, and I was just browsing at the stuff. And then I'd also previously seen a video of Mark talking about his watches on Hodinkee. And I thought, I remember this guy, right? This is the guy that, is part of this store. So I spoke to one of his employees. And then I think, I don't know if I said Mark or something, is Mark here? He said, yeah, he's just over there. And I actually didn't recognize him. I actually walked past him, right? And then Mark was kind enough to give me some of his time, and we spoke. And then my friend Mark ended up taking us down to his second store in Landmark. And my friend bought I think it was a Drake's Collab watch strap.
Yeah, the silk ones. Yeah,
the silk one, the black one, the dark navy. Yeah, and that was it. And that was kind of like how the friendship started. And ever since, I come down Hong Kong, and also I must say, COVID has definitely helped our relationship.
Seeing you virtually every single day.
Friendship. I quickly added friendship.
I'll make it clear.
Yeah, friendship. That sounded really dodgy.
Because Mark, you have been someone that's very kind to us, watch collectors and the group as a whole. Because the first time I met Mark was actually for an introduction through the store. Because originally I was going to do a watch event through our group, and I asked, "Is there any way we can use your store?" I messaged you and you go, "Yeah, sure," and then you booked us this time, and then you allowed us graciously to use your space quite comfortably. And through that, actually, most of my guys got into tailoring slowly but surely. So they couldn't really quite afford some of the pieces that you had, but they started off low, then they moved themselves up, which I thought was pretty great.
Yeah, one thing that really shocked me about Mark when I especially had a few cigars with Mark was he mentioned it earlier about, what would your family think if you actually decide to go tailoring, right? But he's actually an example of actually someone who did that, right? And similarly with me, I have a certain family background, and I've kind of like not decided to pursue X career, changed into something I really love. Yeah, which is kind of like an industry that, again, most Chinese parents would say, well, what? Yeah. So immediately when he said that, it resonated with me. And, you do know the kind of experiences and the mental thought process you're going to go through when you make that decision. So, yeah, I thought I really respected him for that.
Thanks, man.
That's really solid. Well, this, tailoring is one part of Mark, which I think, he has ample amount of knowledge, from materials, Mark will be talking about wool, cotton.
Yeah, but he's not like a
all
dick.
that.
He's not a dick about it like you. he doesn't go around saying you look shit. Yeah, you look crap. Yeah, you need to get that done. That's a quarter inch off. Yeah, your shirt collar isn't tucked in there. I've never seen him like that.
There's two parts of selling. Mark's got the soft side, and you've got the aggressive side. That's how you influence someone to buy. So Mark and I are team working here, you know. But going back to that point, so tailoring is one part which again you're very knowledgeable about, but the second part is actually watches, which is the main form of this podcast as well. So we'd love to know how you began with understanding your taste in watches, because you're quite developed now as a collector.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still learning. There's still a ton of more things that I would love to know more about. I got my first fancy watch back in high school. I think it was after I did well in my GCSEs, and my parents, for my birthday / passed the exams and didn't fail horribly.
10 A stars. What did they give you first, Alan?
I got a few A stars, not that many though.
You would have got a Patek if it was 10 A stars, right?
No, believe me. I got a little quartz Seamaster, which I still have. It was back when Pierce Brosnan was James Bond. It was the GoldenEye one. No, it was the one before the GoldenEye one with the wavy blue dial.
I think I got that one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think I had that. What color did you have?
No, it only came in blue though.
Oh, was it only? Yeah, mine was blue.
Wait,
That dark blue
did
with
it?
the wavy dial, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the one. Yeah, but mine was auto.
Yeah, so I was like,
rub it
oh,
in.
the auto's too... I was like, oh, that's too thick. So I got the quartz one instead.
Yeah, you're right. It is thick.
And I was like, oh. And later on, I was like, did I make a mistake on that? But you know what? I still like it. I still have that watch. And actually, funny story, one of my customers has the same watch. And the lume plots go really orange. Like he wears it on the beach and to go diving and stuff all the time. And it goes very orange. It looks really, really cool that way.
I found, to be honest, like afterwards, it was my first step into luxury watches with that watch. And I thought, oh, you can tell the difference between some of the finishing, how everything is done, right? But then again, as you keep going high, then the bracelet I thought was so thick, right? It's really has to come off the bracelet to have any kind of class and elegance, unless you're a big white Caucasian man wearing a short sleeve shirt and driving a BMW. But
Mm-hmm.
then when did your collection? Well, when did you start getting really into watches?
Oh, okay. So after that
that.
Seamaster,
Yep.
My first paycheck and my first job in London, I went and bought an Omega Chronostop because I used to walk by Austin K, which is a secondhand watch shop. And this is what they used to call shops like that before, right? They used to call them secondhand watch shops, not vintage shops. And I think I bought it because it had a gray dial. It was cheap also. Like I remember paying £350 for it. And I was like, wow, I didn't know like fancy watches could be this cheap. And that was what drove me for a lot of the initial period, was like just, enjoying hunting for deals and seeing what you could get for so little money. After that, I ended up with an IWC. I forget the reference, but it was on the 8641 caliber, which is one of their more famous automatic calibers. And then
Would that be the engineer?
no, it was just an ordinary time with central seconds, but not an engineer. Yeah. And you know what? I actually don't remember what came after that. I think I just like kept looking and buying and flipping and chopping and changing. And I think that is when I really started to learn more, was like buying a lot, making mistakes a lot, and then selling a lot as well. And actually, if anything, it's probably the selling that teaches you more than anything else. Because it's with the selling. First, you have to make sure you're representing what you're selling as well as possible. That's important. And secondly, it hones your taste, because then you're like, okay, I don't need this thing, and I don't need it for this, and this reason. Like, it makes you think about what those reasons are.
yeah, they really push you to the cliff edge, and you have to make a decision.
Yeah.
And how much you actually really like the watch as well. It's a very complete journey when you have to think about selling as well. Yeah.
As to it, and because like with the way you dress, because you're mainly in a suit, so do you mainly focus on dress watches of a particular size as well?
I have preferred smaller watches for a long time. I don't have big wrists. I cared enough about the subject. I made this whole long survey about it that got a lot of responses. And personally, I've always been in the region of, say, 32 to 36 millimeters. I have a few that are 38, and very, very once in a long while, I'll have a 40 or a 42. But yes, smaller watches for me. Like it's not just the clothing. Like I think on me as a personality, they just make sense.
Well, talking of 38mm watches, because I think of all the watches in Mark's collection, my favorite is actually the FP Journe Resonance. And there was a side story to that. So I think this is one of my stories, which I quite like. I mean, if you can break it down to us, I'd love to hear it.
Double the length of this podcast. It's a very long story.
Keep it short, but try.
So at one point I was collecting FP Journes wherever I could. And there was a certain model that was really interesting. Or you know what, let me start from the beginning then for why I liked FP Journe. Like, actually, I got into FP Journe because, do you remember a few years ago there was George Daniels, there was like a George Daniels auction at Sotheby's. This was probably like 7 years ago, something like that. And, all the watches were amazing, but there was this FP Journe Souverain in there that FP had engraved for George. And I was like, oh my God, that watch is incredible. And so I made a bid on it. And obviously, like, that watch just ran away. Like, and I don't normally sit in auction rooms. That auction room was like, it was rammed. You couldn't even get into the room. So I was like standing outside with this like very pathetic paddle way at the back, not able to afford anything. But that kind of got me into FP Journe. And then eventually I tracked down a few. And I was always interested in seeing like the smaller FP Journes, because the smaller FP Journes technically are marketed as ladies' watches, and they are a little bit hard to come by because they're just not made in particularly big numbers. So there's one in particular I really was interested in called the Octa Divine 36, and eventually I managed to track one down at a dealer in California, and I wrote in and sent him a couple emails, and eventually I bought it from the guy. And it was fine. I loved it. It was a great watch. And then one day the date wheel stopped advancing, so I sent it into servicing at FP Journe in New York. And I got a message back from a gent named Pierre Halimi, who's actually the CEO of FP Journe USA. And he's like, oh, I'm very sorry, but we have to confiscate this watch. This is a stolen watch. And I was like, oh, what? And,
that sucks, man.
Yeah,
when that happens.
Hasn't happened to me since, but
Touch wood.
Touch wood. Not a great thing to learn. And so I was asked to produce all of the paperwork to show that I had bought it in good faith, which of course I did. And, to be fair to FP Journe and the USA team, like they were very civilized about the whole thing, And after I had kind of produced paperwork and cleared myself, they're like, listen, thank you so much for doing this. Unfortunately, like the watch was already paid for by our insurance company, so we need to return this as stolen property back to our insurance company. And what they meant was that watch was actually stolen from their Parisian boutique over 10 years ago. And it just,
stolen from boutique?
Yeah, it got stolen from FP Journe's boutique in Paris, I guess over 10 years ago, and eventually made its way into the US market and eventually made its way into my hands. But he's like, listen, if you ever have a chance, like, let's meet at the boutique sometimes, have a coffee. I was like, of course. So I went and I met Pierre at his boutique uptown in New York, and we're having a good chat. And as we were sitting there, one after the other, two of my best customers in New York walked through the door. And they were like, hey, how are you doing? It's great to see you, Mark. It's great to see you, Pierre. And Pierre was kind of surprised that his customers knew me. And so he was curious, and he came to my store, and then he ended up really liking the store. And so we started to do some events together. And Pierre actually has been a really loyal customer of the store ever since. And Pierre was like, listen, I'm really sorry I had to confiscate your watch like that, but why don't I lend you something for a while? What do you want out of my collection? And I was like, oh, because
that is insane.
So, Pierre has
no, but the thing is, Mark is just being so chilled about that. Everybody listening to this be like, whoa, guy's got ice flowing through his veins.
And so I'd seen Pierre wear this Resonance before, and he was telling me about it, and I thought the Resonance was amazing. So I was like, can I borrow your Resonance for a bit? And he's like, yeah, of course. So he let me borrow it for a while, and I was like, oh my God, this thing's amazing. And then later on, he was like, listen, just as a favor, because we put you through so much, if you ever want a special one for yourself, maybe we can do something. And so I was like, oh, wow, that's really great. Okay. So I went away and I thought about it a little bit. And since I'd had his resonance for a while, I was like, okay, we should definitely, I would love to have something that was a resonance, but, edited by me somehow. So I started making these Photoshop mock-ups of like maybe what I would like in a resonance. And originally, I actually wanted a white dial resonance, white and blue. But, I was talking to one of my colleagues about this, and he's like, that's really interesting. I'm sure some of our customers would be interested too. And so I went back to Pierre and I was like, listen, would it be possible to get more than one of these? Like, I think that maybe we could do a special, and like this is not a special, I have to be clear, like officially this is not a special for me or for, say, the Armoury. This is really more of a special that the New York boutique put out that just happened to have kind of some of our handwriting on it. So since it was, more for a few people, I decided to make it a blue dial. But, like there are a lot of blue dials out there. So I was really looking for like a shade of blue that was special and different in some way. And I kind of just parked the project for a little while to think about it. And eventually, by sheer chance, I was looking at an exhibition at the Southwark. At the Southwark Art Center, what is it called? Or they just called the Southwark in London, south of the river. Yeah. So they had a great exhibition of Andreas Gursky's work, and there was a beautiful aerial photo that Gursky took of a shoreline with kind of like some tan beaches and the surf in this kind of very pale beige, and then a deep blue ocean. And I was looking at that, I was like, oh, those are the colors I want. So I snapped a photo, I sampled those colors, and I started to play with that on the dial, because what I was looking for really was like an FP Journe watch where the lettering was not so stark. Like there was a period of Journe watches where everything looked almost a little too new. The early ones weren't like that. Like the font work was a little bit finer and darker, but that somehow, like there was a couple of years where things were looking really a little too beautiful. And so I wanted to have something that looked not like faux patina, but like a little bit almost aged, a little bit quieter. And those were the colors that we used to make that watch. Now, Pierre was like, listen, it's going to be tough to like just put this under your name. But since we share a couple of customers, and some of them are really like very important customers to FP Journe, why don't we see if we can do it as like a group application or something like that? So I sought kind of permission from one of my really good customers, and luckily he and I get along really well. He actually lent me his Journe repeater for a while. I don't know why.
Oh, that's amazing.
I did not ask for it,
No,
but
I've been listening to this story and kind of actually just switched off, because everything that's kind of just played in my mind is, why the hell did I not know Mark earlier? Right? Like I'm just thinking, damn, like fucking hell, man. Right.
I'm sorry, I'm reading the really long-winded version of that.
No, that's amazing. No, seriously, that story, again, I think I'm just gobsmacked.
I think that's almost perfect ending.
It is.
Well, I mean, so there's still more to it too.
Oh,
So,
please
complete. No, we'll
so we
hang out.
submitted the order under actually one of my customers' names for 5 pieces, and it was going to be, me, him, and 3 other gents, and it was a while. We just waited. Wasn't really sure if FP would approve it or not, because he could definitely have just been like, no, I'm not doing this, because the other thing was I was actually requesting a 38mm case, not a 40mm case, and I actually wanted to have more than 5, because I felt like we had a couple of friends and customers who would have enjoyed that watch. But what ended up happening is we got the last 5 platinum resonance cases ever. Like that was it. That's all they had left in the factory. Those were our 5, and that's why it was only 5 pieces. So like FP approved it, and actually he made one change to my Photoshop render, which I thought was really interesting. Like, the resonance is obviously like at the end of the day, it's 2 watches, left and right, mechanically coupled in the movement, but like at the end of the day, it's 2 watches. And I had wanted navy lettering for all of the hour markers and minute mark. Well, there aren't minute markers really, but anyway. So I wanted navy lettering on both sides, but FP only did navy lettering on the 12-hour side, and on the 24-hour side, he actually retained the original black and red. And at first I was like, I wonder why he did that. But I thought about it and I was like, no, why wouldn't he do that? Actually, these are two distinct clocks. They should have two distinct sets of coloring. So that was the only change he made.
That's sticking part to when someone's very firm with what they do, they should stick with it, right? That's what you just mentioned with
Well,
tailoring
yeah,
as
exactly.
well.
I mean, like listen, I'm just glad that he even looked at it because like I would not have cared at all if he was like, this is a terrible idea. I'm not doing this for you. And, you know, the silver lining beyond the already very silver lining of getting these resonances was I got my original divine back. Like what happened was Pierre was like, listen, you know, we've become quite good friends over the years. Like, if you want, I can try and get that divine back, because returning that watch to the insurance company is actually a little bit meaningless to the insurance company. They don't need it, right? They've already priced in the idea that they've lost money because of the theft. So he went and talked to the insurance company and got me my divine back for super cheap.
Oh, wow.
Because the insurance company didn't know what the hell to do with it, so they would just take any offer on it. So it was not $1, but it was not much off $1. And then they serviced it, and it was better than ever.
Wow.
And that watch is in my safe now.
Boom.
What a
And
story.
the other untied loose end, which I will tie up now, so I had paid the original dealer, right? And the original dealer, I went back to him. I was like, hey, you sold me a stolen watch. Like, I'd like to get my money back. And they were very uncooperative. Like, they wouldn't give me my money back. You know, and I said, listen, we can work out a payment plan or something. I know you're not a big store, but they're like, no. We're going to find whoever gave us the watch and you chase that person. I'm like, no. So in the end, I took it to court. I got a lawyer. I didn't take it to court. I got a lawyer and they went back and forth a few times, and finally they settled with me and I got all my money back.
Nice.
Wow, so you got the watch for dirt cheap and then you got the money back.
Yeah.
Wow.
I lost a little bit on the court filing, and that was it.
So, you know, sometimes it does pay to be a good guy
Exactly.
and do things properly.
Yeah.
And to be patient. I mean, this whole
Yeah.
thing took probably like 2 years to resolve, but it's a good 2 years.
I know our viewers and listeners want to, you know, hang around for a bit longer, but that does conclude part one, which I don't want to end so soon. Stay tuned for part two because it's going to be equally as exciting. So see you guys very soon.
Thank you for tuning in to the Waiting List podcast. Hit the subscribe button and the next episode will come straight to your phone as soon as it's ready. Whilst I'm here, please remember to leave a nice review and follow us on Instagram at the Waiting List podcast.